So the last steps in making this space is to close up that hole like this one, because that will be leaking light. And we also want to make sure that the stairs are sort of the right height. I think we need to scale them up a bit. And then we're also going to deal with those cutting objects to make sure they don't appear in our renders. So let's just start with the cutting objects. So if you see now, if you go into your rendered view, which is up here in the shading options, everything is really dark. You might not see the same result as me, but make sure that if you go to the render tab, that you have the cycles render engine enabled. You might be by default in using Eevee. So if you put on cycles, you will see something like this, hopefully. And note that I'm in camera view. You get there by pressing 0. The reason why it's so dark is because our cutting objects are actually blocking the holes. So we need to make them invisible to the rendered outcome. So I'm going to go back to solid view and select my cutting object, just one of them, and go into this object properties here. I'm going to pull this up so we can see a bit more of this. And what we did earlier was to change the display as wireframe, but that is in the viewport, only in the viewport, nothing to do with renders. So I'm going to collapse that, and I'm going to look at this visibility. So here we can see that it's being shown in viewports and renders. So that's basically where we can sort of uncheck these boxes. And if I uncheck renders and I go into my rendered view, you can still see it there, because we are still looking at it in the 3D viewport. But if you actually go to render and render image, then it will disappear. But if we want this to disappear here, we have to also uncheck viewports. And now we can see that it just sort of opened up that little hole. We can do the same thing with the cutting object, the other cutter, select it from the outliner, and uncheck both of these boxes, and you can see that it sort of appears there. But it's still there. It's sort of grayed out. So if you want to select this and, you know, do something else with this these objects, you have to select them from the outliner and then go into the object properties and then show in viewports, and then you can start working with this object again. So make sure you disable this in both viewports and renders. Keep them there for now. And let's take a look again at the rendered results. So now we can see that this is this opening that we want to get rid of. And if I go into my world tab, which is the red icon here, I'm going to change this color to white. You can see that sort of makes everything a bit brighter. And the strength, I'm going to just turn that up to like 5. So it's even brighter. It's really like sort of overly bright perhaps. So we want to close up this hole. So I'm going to go into the solid shading and take a look at what we have here. So I'm going to select my walls, go into edit mode, and I can see that we have this geometry here that sort of supports this process. So I'm going to go to face select and select this face. But basically I'm just going to do this really fast, because this is not a really important part of the building, because this is not part of the exhibition space. So I'm just going to extrude this out, you know, a random amount. This is just to create some kind of a dark shadowy corner there. And to actually make the corner, I'm going to extrude a tiny bit more, and then I can select the other side and extrude that again. And here we go. Oh, I don't have my shortcut keys enabled. Sorry about that. Yeah, so the only thing I did there was just to extrude, and that's just by pressing E on the keyboard. Okay, so now we have the walls, but we don't have a ceiling here. But I'm gonna wait a moment with doing that, because first I want to make sure that the stairs are like the right height. And to do that, there's no easy way to do it, because we don't have the measurements for it. But we're just going to sort of eyeball it from a photograph, I think. Here we can have a better look at how the stairs look. And we can see the second flight of stairs has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 whole stairs, 7.5 stairs until they meet the ceiling or meet that beam. 7.5. So we can just simply take a look at that, and you can see that there's way more here, so we need to extrude, not extrude, but scale this up. So with the stairs selected, you can just press S to scale, and then confine that to the Z axis, and then just sort of pull this up, and you can just sort of count the stairs, you know, so it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.5. So something like this. But it was the beam that was meeting it, so it's maybe just exactly like 8, something like this. Okay, but I mean, again, if the stairs are not like an intricate part of like your exhibition or your piece of work, then like, you know, this is a purely like a aesthetic part of the building. And so of course, if you are making something onto the stairs, you would then, I guess, go and measure each step and make sure that it's exactly the right size, right? Okay, now we have the stairs in the sort of the correct scale. So we are going to now take a look at this wall piece again. And now we can see we need to make that taller. So I'm just going to go into edit mode and select the top faces, which are these ones. And let's select this one as well. So that's just left clicking and holding down shift. And then I'm going to press E to extrude. And I don't have to confine that to the Z axis, it does that automatically. And I'm just going to go into this floor piece of the stairs, like that. Something like this. And then we also want to close this off. And we can just do that by simply going to edge, going to edge select mode. I'm going to select this edge there. And I'm going to extrude that out. So E and, was it X? Yes. Until it sort of meets that again, like that. And then we have this opening here that we want to close. So a simple way of doing that, you can be in edge select mode. You want to select the edges that are surrounding the opening that you want to close. And then you can use this beautiful tool called fill tool. Just press F on the keyboard. And that fills the gap. And that doesn't have to have any thickness, because this is just to close off the light. Okay, let's go to camera view now and disable both of these overlays and gizmos and go to rendered view and take a look. And now we got this beautiful dark shadow coming out there. Yes, I think this is looking pretty good. You can see that the denoise kicked in, and if you don't have that, you can enable that by opening up the sampling menu, and in the denoising segment there's viewport and render, and if you check the viewport denoising, it has automatic or open image denoising. If you just keep it automatic, it will ask you when you want to start denoising. So if you just say like 1, it will basically start denoising on like the first sample or like immediately. But if you keep this a bit like a higher number, it will basically render the image until the sample number 30, and then the denoising kicks in. So it sort of depends on how much you want to render the image until it starts to denoise it. And this is only in the viewport, so it has no impact on the render. And you can also check the render one, but I recommend that you will watch a separate video on just the denoising and render settings for more about this stuff. And perhaps the final step for us right now is to make a render of this. So of course we have no texture or nothing, but let's just make one nice render. So let's take a look at the sampling. We have the render samples and the viewport samples. We can just put this to 100 or something, but understand that the higher this number is, the longer time it's going to take to render. I'm gonna use 250 samples, and I'm not gonna use any denoising for this, but I'm gonna use adaptive sampling. That's really good because that sort of helps speed things up. And I'm gonna just go into my render tab and render image. So this is my final image of this space for now. In the next videos we will be doing some textures, adding objects in, and learning a lot more modeling tricks.